Last time we chatted, I was talking about selling cars and trucks in my 10 years in the business, selling to dead people and strippers and all the fun I had. And this one is about leases. I'm trying to explain leases from the way I remember them, and I know they've improved lately, but I didn't lease any dead people. So we won't have any of that in here. These are all live and kicking. And I've had a few leases too, but that's why we're going to cover leasing. Finance is so much easier, and most of you know all about that part of it. So I'm not going to spend much time on finance, but leasing, it's an interesting thing. I was there when it started. That's how old I am. They had some funny names for it, but this is about my opinions of all that time when I was leasing to people and leasing myself. And it started back in the 90s. That's when I got into business. I think it was back in 1991, right off the farm, straight to town, the big city of Denver.
If you have a short bed truck, you know it's not easy to hook up to a gooseneck. Pop-Up came out with these extensions from 9 inches to 16 inches to keep you from breaking out your back window when you're pulling a gooseneck trailer. And everybody uses a short bed. That's the most proper truck there is a crew cab short bed. So protect that window.
And leases, the whole idea, it's always about making money. And no matter what you're doing, when it comes to selling something, there's always going to be money involved, and people are trying to make the most money they can, and that's your money that they're trying to take and make the most of. So that's what it boils down to. And leasing too, in my opinion, they were started to confuse you. We didn't believe what it was like back there in the old days. But the leasing, that's why leasing has such weird terms. Instead of interest, it's called custom money factor. Instead of resale value, it's residual. They come up with all these terms, so you think that they're big people with big words and that they know more than you do. Well, they do on leasing. You're really at a disadvantage unless you do a lot of homework about how leases work. But they have improved, like I said, but you need to do a lot of research and get all your questions answered before you ever sign the lease, because they're going to try to shove it into it really fast. And that's, people get confused about the Consumer Protection Act. They think I go someplace, I have 3 days to change my mind. You do if a Kirby salesman comes to your house where they figure you're more intimidated in your own home, someone putting pressure on you to buy something, or insurance or any of that. But if you go to somebody else's business, you're on your own. You're not protected. You don't have 3 days. So you go there, you sign something, you're stuck. And they have a lot of ways to enforce that. They'll charge you so much a day, so much a mile, all those kinds of things. But they start off with these clever little terms called half a car plan, or only pay for what you use, and it was a strategy to bring out some new gadget to help sell you or lease you into a vehicle and make profit. And it was really weird back in the 70s and part of the 80s. It was all purchases back then, but you didn't know what the cost of a car was. There were no Maroni stickers, no window stickers. So the dealers could get by with unbelievable things, and they did. I knew a lot of those salespeople and what they would do to people during the good old years when you didn't know what a vehicle cost, you didn't know what an invoice was, you didn't have any of that stuff. And it was a very dangerous time to be buying cars, because you didn't know what the cost of any of that was, and that battle went on for a long time. And I remember even back in the 90s when I was working for AAA Auto Club, buying vehicles for the members. There were 2 dealers in Denver, in Colorado, that, and this is after the Maroni law came from the senator from, I think his last name was Maroni, from Oklahoma, put the law in that you had to have a sticker on the car that told you what the MSRP, the retail, didn't have to tell you the invoice or anything. It told you what was in the car and what the manufacturer's suggested retail price was. But there was 2 dealers back there in the 90s when I started in this, and they made their own Maroni stickers. And they would take the factory one off the window and make their own, and they had a little car on it, the little EPA thing, and have their price. And that surprised me that they were getting by with that clear into the 90s. So it's a tricky business. There's a lot of businesses like that, but that was happening. So leasing, from what I can gather, was put together to hide more money because it's a confusing thing. You're buying for half a car, you're paying for all these things, but you don't know where the money's going. A lot of times, a salesman will want more money down. They'll want to trade. All that is another way to hide money, just like the trade-in value. You don't really know what you're getting for it. You need to work those as two separate deals in a purchase, because otherwise, they'll tell you give you whatever you want for the trade, but they're adding it to the price of the new one, or hiding it in the price of the new one. Or in a lease, they're hiding it so many different places. So you really got to do the research, and it's better off not to trade in on a lease, and it's better off not to put a lot of money down, because at some point it is harder to find out where that money went for, what it paid for. If it did lower the residual because you're paying for part of the car earlier, that's all you're doing. You're just prepaying for the car if you put money down. But anyway, that's kind of how it all started, and it was interesting. I was there at the beginning of that because I knew the guys who made that half a car deal and put that together. I actually worked with him later on and found out who he was and how he started. But there are some good leases out there too. But they're thinking now, this is 25 years later after I was really involved in it, and thanks to the internet and consumer laws, residual value is pretty well stated. But that's the biggest part of the lease, residual value. That's the future value. It's what the lease companies have, these magic computers to try to figure out, well, how the car is going to resell 3 years from now, 2 years from now. And that's what most of them are, is 2 and 3 year leases. So they put in the value on how they think that car is going to resell. That's basically what it is, a resale value. It's called a residual. So, and how good that residual is, or what they think the residual is what determines your payment. So if it's got a really high residual value, worth more money at the end, that means you're paying for less of the vehicle, giving you a lower payment. And that made sense. So when you're picking a vehicle, you want to make sure that you ask the finance department what the residual value is. You want to know what that is before you make your calculations, because you really should be comparing purchase and lease and see where your payments are. Because generally leases are done to give you a lower payment, supposedly. That's the idea. And two, when you get into a lease, you can time them to what your warranty is. If your warranty is 3 years, you can do a 3-year lease. You never have to worry about fixing anything. But I remember when I was in it, the Expedition, the Ford Expedition, brand new, just came out in 1997. And it had a 70% residual, which was very high, which means you could get into a very cheap lease, and you wouldn't be taking a chance because you could buy it at the residual at the end, or you could walk away from it. You might pay a few fees, or, might have to replace tires, depends on how many miles you put on. But that was a good deal. And I remember one of the first cars I bought was a Ford Fusion, and that had a real high resale value, residual, back in 2006. So I got a really low lease payment on that. But I was stupid. I was trying to get that lowest payment, so I went with a 12,000 mile lease. That's another part of the leasing situation, is you figure out how many miles you're going to put on it, and it's better to go high because the penalty is high if you go over that. So, but a 12,000 mile lease per year is cheaper than a 15,000 mile one. And I knew that, but I'm just trying to get that low payment. You start getting all excited about the payments. But at 12,000 miles, I ended up putting a lot more miles than I imagined I would on that car. And so at the end of the lease, besides having the tires wore out that I would have had to replace to turn in as a lease, you also end up with these big fees, these big cost per mile that they charge you. So on that Fusion, that 2006 Fusion, I ended up buying it just so I didn't have to pay all those extra mileage charges, and then I ended up trading it in, I think. But the other part of the lease that they try to confuse you with is called the cost of money factor. That's the interest, their way of calculating interest, which is basically the use of the vehicle. And they'll have some other fees on there that they try to hide, like a disposition fee and some other bogus fees. And it's like dealer handling. Some of that you can negotiate. Some dealers will, some won't. Most, if you go to the fleet department, they always will take that off. But learn how to use that calculator and try to follow along with them how they put together the payment of the lease, and ask as many questions as you want, and have them figure out as many scenarios as you want. Say 12,000 mile lease per year versus a 15,000 mile per year lease, and and if you go really high, you can buy mileage in up front too. But it can protect you in a lot of areas. Besides, if you find a vehicle that has a real high resale value, a high residual, that helps you. So you're not, if you don't really keep a car for a long time, that was always a big pitch. Was this way every 3 years you get a new car, you don't have to worry about anything. And it kind of makes sense if everything falls in line. And if you always have a new vehicle, and like we ended up with a lot of new vehicles because I had the wife and the young kids. I was always worried about them breaking down on the road somewhere, and I wanted them to have the warranty, wanted them to have roadside assistance, and not worry about it. So we ended up with a new car about every 3 years, sometimes 5 years. But anyway, but there's so many new things that come out. I mean, one example would be like the new Ram e-Torque. Now, I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a new system, and so it hasn't really been proven in the market how well that's going to do. So we don't really know what the future value is going to be, or the resale value is going to be in the future. And I don't know the residual value. You got to find all that stuff out. But if that has a high residual, I would certainly lease that versus buy it in case it does have problems. And there's a lot of vehicles like that. I mean, you know how it is lately. The Volkswagen and Ram diesels all got in trouble with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, with goofing with their tests and doing all that. So they got millions and billions and sued and EPA settlements. So those vehicles, you would be much better off to lease them and walk away at the end of the lease, not worry about whether they're going to give you a new diesel or they're going to give you money for the problem. And a lot of, I mean, I had a 6-liter diesel from Ford made by Navistar. Mine was 2006. They came out in the end of 2003. And they had a lot of problems. I had mine in a shop, I think, in 6 different states. And that was not a lease. I wish it would have been a lease, but it was a purchase. So when I paid it off, my resale value was very, very low. It took forever to sell it. And same thing with the Chevy 6.2, those old diesels. After the 5.7, they had the 6.2. Those had enough problems, and that would have been a good vehicle to lease. So there's all kinds of examples like that where a lease can protect you. But it's, then you don't have to worry about it too. On a lease, you don't worry about trading value at the end, selling at the end. You have the choice. You can buy it for that residual value that you know up front. You can, trade it in some cases. I had friends that I leased trucks to that they would lease it. At the end of the lease, they would buy it and resell it and make money on it. So there's a lot of angles. You just got to do your homework on them. So, that was like when I bought my last truck. That's what I was trying to decide. Should I lease this or should I buy it? Well, I ended up getting 0 interest for 6 years, and I got all this. Of course, I'm self-employed, so I had a lot of tax deductions. So, of course, I bought it. But that's what you always got to do, is look at all your options so you know you're making the right decision. And the thing with accessories, too. I mean, most people don't know this, but on a lease, you're really not supposed to add a bunch of accessories, especially the program type that soup up your engine and all that. That's actually in your contract. You can't do that. And I know a lot of people with Jeeps especially, they'll put winches, they'll put all these things on it, but that doesn't affect your residual. That doesn't affect what it's worth at the end of the lease. So if you put thousands of dollars in stuff on your new Jeep, at the end you may want to buy it so that you can take and sell it for more money because of all those accessories. That's how it is when you trade in a vehicle. They don't give you extra money for accessories or tonneau covers or toppers or anything. So that's what you got to look at too. If you usually accessorize your vehicle, the lease may not be for you. But there's so many fees. Make sure every one of them gets explained to you, like an acquisition fee, and a lease-in option disposition fee. And they have a lot of things to cover their reconditioning. They have a lot of stuff that you can cut out or negotiate over. But I don't know that short-term leasing is good for diesels because maybe the half-ton class. There's all three have a half-ton diesel, which will pay for themselves from fuel mileage much quicker, like maybe 3 years, maybe 70,000 miles. Because they're only a $4,000 option or in that range. Where you get to the heavy duty diesels, they're $11,000. So it might take you 200,000 miles to where that you paid for the extra cost of the diesel engine through fuel mileage savings. So if you lease it for 3 years, you really haven't even paid for that extra cost that diesel engine cost you. So I'm not really a fan of it for these diesels, and unless you're in business and you need their write-off. But anyway, I would certainly go for the higher mileage, one like 15,000 miles if you decide to do that. And don't get all snookered like I do on lower payment. Even 0 interest really has an emotional effect on me when I get free money. So you got to get rid of the emotions and calm down, get that poker face. You're ready to go in there and play hardball. But I've had 2 leases, and I always went over the miles, and I ended up paying extra for it. And you can get into trouble with that. So make sure you kind of know what your future plans are too. And I've sold hundreds of truck leases, or sold trucks with leases, and the big crew cabs, and a lot of times the cash flow works out well on some of those, not necessarily the diesels, but you're getting a big truck and you can write it off your taxes if you're self-employed. But too, if you're buying it, if it's over 6,000 gross vehicle weight rating, you can write it off too. They made that for the pickups, so they brought it down. It used to be like 6,500 gross vehicle weight rating. Now it's like 6,000 pound gross vehicle weight rating. But if you turn it in before the end of the lease, of course, there's a fee for that. Damage to the vehicle, there's a fee. Hopefully, your insurance has you up to snuff on that, and then you watch how the tire wear is. But if you want to buy it at the end, you can decide that, and you can finance that amount too if you want to go into a purchase. But that means you're financing a used truck, and the interest is normal interest on used trucks. It's not the bogus thing of the zero interest, and trade it for rebates and all that. So that's a disadvantage if you buy it at the end of the lease and you want to finance it. Is you're not going to get, you're going to get whatever the market is, whether it's 6% or 8% or whatever, your credit can handle. And that's the thing about leases too, is it takes generally a better FICO score, a better score on your credit history than a purchase, because they know you're not going to have it very long, and all those things are involved in that. So if you got a really bad credit score, you may not want to do a lease. You may not be able to do a lease. So you've got so much stuff to do, so much research to make it all work together for you. And the cost of money factor, you're still getting paid somewhat interest. It can be a cheaper interest in a finance, but you've got to figure all that. You've got to have them convert their cost of money factor into an interest and say, what does this compare to? You have every right to ask those kinds of questions. I mean, you should understand every bit of a lease before you into it. And it's because you're committed for whatever years it is. And then most of the time, it's a lot of times you have to get gap insurance because since it is a short-term kind of an obligation, 2 or 3 years usually. If you were to total it out, it may be worth less than what you still owe in the lease. Gap insurance fills in that gap between what it really is worth after the accident and what your payment is, or what residual is at that point in your lease. So the gap insurance, usually you have to do it, but it's because you're upside down at least the first 1 or 2 years, because you're only paying for the first part of it, and that gap insurance can save you a lot of money. You can even buy that for a purchase for a loan. I definitely get it on a lease. And you still want to negotiate your truck price and that cost of money factor. You don't just go in there and say, hey, I want to pay retail, I want to get a lease. You say, hey, we're going to negotiate this to a certain price. And that's, the acquisition cost, that's where it starts. But you can still negotiate that price. You're not stuck to a retail MSRP price on the sticker. So, you got to figure that in, and I would try to not get into using a trade-in or put much money down. But, stick to your guns and don't get screwed on the deal, because, that's their job, is to sell you the most vehicle or lease you the most vehicle, or the least amount of vehicle for the most amount of money. That's, the formula for selling. The bottom line is, if the lease seems too complicated, don't do it. Do your homework. Praise God for the internet. That's what we're all about, the internet. There's so much research you can do out there, so many facts you can find out about. It's clearly a cool thing to use for a tool. And I was so glad when I was selling it, the internet, all came about. It was late 90s. So anyway, have fun, take your time, take long test drives. Don't put up with any crap from anybody, whether it's the salesperson, the closing manager, or the finance guys back in the box. So stick to your guns.